Government has revised down South Africa's economic growth from 1.3% to 1.1% in 2024. This is mostly due to disappointing tax income. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana says the economy is forecast to grow by an average of 1.8% over the next 3 years. Now, the National Treasury further notes that the economy is beginning to reflect the combined effects of a more stable global environment, structural reforms, uninterrupted electricity supply, and cautious confidence in the new government of national unity. Well, to further unpack this year's medium-term budget policy statement, let's welcome the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, who joins us this morning. Minister, pleasure to have you. Thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
A question that I think we can begin with, because everybody was sort of talking about this as the first medium-term budget policy announcement that you were going to be giving as the government of national unity. Was it any different for you putting this together? Did you have a lot of consultations with now 10 parties involved in all of this, or was it business as usual for you?
No, it was business as usual. Mind you, the budget process, there are institutional arrangements that exist. For instance, we've got the Ministers' Committee on the budget, which consists of members of the different parties as well. So in constructing the budget, they were part of the discussion. And that's the first point. The second point, on substance, I think there's general agreement on fiscal consolidation, and therefore it didn't make any difference in that sense.
Yeah, interesting, because I think a lot of people were wondering what the difference would be. But as you say, there are things in place. However, I think what people were expecting was certainly high expectations of an economic boost from new businesses, friendly government of this national unity, and also a halt in load shedding. But it didn't seem that that was the case. So we've now seen the slightly downgraded GDP growth. Is this a concern for you, or were you expecting this? Are we going according to course?
We're not going according to course. That's why we've revised the numbers downwards for this year. But our forecast for the medium term is better than this year. So in that sense, we're taking an optimistic view.
Well, that in itself is, I suppose, something to be optimistic about, is the fact that we're hoping things will change. But the bottom line is that debt is still expected to peak at 75.5% of GDP. That's in the next year, 2025, 2026. And the IMF has urged Treasury to introduce a debt ceiling, capping it at 77%. Let's get your views on this. What is your take on the IMF suggestion?
I mean, I take a pessimistic view of that suggestion, because the problem with debt is not its size, it's the capacity of that economy to service the debt. So South Africa's problem is not a debt problem. South Africa's problem is a growth problem.
Yeah.
So what we should be focusing on is how do we grow this economy in such a way that it can be able to service its debt, whatever its size.
Well, certainly everybody's saying the same thing, and it is up to government to grow this economy. How do we grow it? Because you can talk as much as you like, but one of the things that people are missing from all of this is growth in the economy and job creation. Let's get to the bottom of that. How are you going to do this? I know you outlined plans, but perhaps you want to talk about those.
Before I get to the plans, let's deal with this misconception that growth can only come from government. If you look at the employment figures, out of the 16 million people working, only 1.2 million people are working for government. For the economy to work, all of us, including the private sector, has got to participate in growing that economy. What government can do is to create a conducive environment to achieve that objective. Therefore, we've got outlined 4 pillars which we think will contribute to that. The first one, to create a macroeconomic stability, an environment for growth. The second thing is state capacity where the state can be able to provide basic things which government and business will need to provide just basic services. And thirdly, we're doing structural reforms in changing how all obstacles and the bottlenecks to make sure that the economy functions. The fourth point is to try and shift the composition of expenditure towards capital investment. In that sense, you kind of pulled the economy with you, including the private sector investment.
Minister, the one big thing, of course, is to contain government spending. That, I know, is one of the major issues for you. And Treasury is targeting reductions in the cost of remunerating South Africa's 1.3 million public servants. I mean, when we look at what the wage bill is, it's sitting at 32% of spending, of total spending. And this, I know, is a big problem for you. So the plans to offer 11 billion rand in incentives to convince 30,000 civil servants to take early retirement. This is, I suppose, one of the implementations you've put there to try and help this wage bill. But how much do you hope to save from this particular initiative?
We anticipate a saving of about 2 billion rand per annum over the medium term, which on its own, over time, it will recover the 11 billion rand lost as a result of the incentive. So, but let me put the point, and I listened to some PSA fellow last night and say we're not genuine into what we're talking about, as if there are two components in the early retirement. We want to achieve two things. The first one, of course, is a reduction in headcount. But the second one is to revitalize and put some young talent into the public services. There are definitely sectors which need younger people now. And that while we will, older people will retire, will employ new people in those sectors.
Minister, I need to ask you about that because you want to employ new people. However, one of the things we've been hearing about is that there's going to not be more appointments of teachers and those in the health sector. And those were two sectors that you have said that in your medium term yesterday, you said there's no new allocations to health and education. However, these are the sectors that are certainly struggling the most, and we've been reading about job cuts and also not hiring and lack of staff. Talk to us about this. How do you attract new when you're getting rid of old, but you're not hiring and there's no money?
I think if there was a sentence that says there will be no hiring of new teachers, it should be a misprint. That was not my message. My message was, there are key sectors which we want to protect. Amongst them is health, education, and all other frontline services. And it is our considered opinion that the provinces which employ teachers must employ more if the need arises.
Yeah, I suppose, one of the big thing is that many of the unions are not happy with this because they are looking at this, and we do know that you are talking a tough love approach, and that certainly is one thing that you have stuck to, is the state-owned enterprises that you're not bailing out, you implementing reforms, and these are things that you have stuck to. But unions are taking a different view of this and saying that, some are earning all the money and the rest is going to no one. So how are you hoping to reform the SOEs and try and meet the unions halfway with what's happening?
Let me just say there are colleagues who are responsible for reforming the SOEs. That's not my line function. My line function is to protect the purse. So all that I'm saying is that it can be right that we spent 520 billion rand between 2009 and now, 520 billion rand on state-owned enterprises. At the same time, we're cutting services such as teaching and nurses, doctors, wiped up the special reserve account for the army. All of those things are basically undermining the fund-run services of government. So we can't allow the state-owned enterprise to be bailed out to the extent of undermining the front-run services of government.
You know, indeed it is. It certainly is. But they are very worried about the whole issue of privatization and that this is just going to become unaffordable for South Africans. Let's talk to that, because one thing that you have done, and that's quite an interesting measure that you've put in place, is that you are incentivizing a lot more private investment into the different entities that we're having, especially the infrastructure investment by private sector participation. Let's talk about this. What more plans are you putting here?
We must draw a distinction between privatization and competition. We're not privatizing a single institution. All we're doing, we are introducing competition because the lack of services and poor performances arises because some of these state-owned enterprises are monopolies, and in that sense, the society must take whatever price they put across. So we're introducing competition, we're not privatizing.
Not privatizing, certainly, but there is a big shift where private sector involvement is something that you are welcoming and you are needing. Obviously, that cooperation and partnership. So that is something that I suppose you can't deny.
No. I'm not denying it. I'm saying we're introducing private operators to compete with the monopolies of the state and ensure that society can get better services. That's all that we're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the rail sector at the moment, the whole of the mining industry is held ransom by one monopoly, and that has got implications for the fiscus. We lost 35 billion rand last financial year precisely because Transnet couldn't perform and there was no alternative.
Yeah. Minister, I know I'm rushing from one point to the next, but I don't have too much time, obviously, on this. But one of the other pressing issues, and I'd like to discuss it with you, is the one where we're talking about this 350 Rand grant, where you mentioned it won't be extended past March of 2025. This one, what is going to happen? Because I know you were saying that government's considering to reform social grants and consolidate public employment initiatives to cater for the unemployment. Can you elaborate a little bit more on this? So as of March 2025, 350 Rand, no more?
No. As of March 2025, 1st of April, the 350 continues.
It continues?
What we are saying, the 350 is not the optimal way of helping our own people. What we are looking at are alternative, what we call active labor market policies, which will assist people to move into gainful employment. No one wants to live at home with a 350. People want to move into gainful employment. And we're looking at options for what we call active labor market policies. Once those are working functional, then we'll start migrating people from the 350 to those active labor market policies.
The basic income grant, there's always been calls for that. Is that something you're considering?
Not at this stage. I don't think the resources we have, it's not a principled issue where we say we wouldn't like to get people to get a basic income grant. It's not a principled issue, it's an affordability issue. Whether the South African economy at this stage can afford a basic income grant, I've got my doubts.
Minister, and this is my final question to you, because I know you have to go. You say South Africa received a positive review from the Financial Action Task Force since the country had been put on the grey list, and that was in February last year. Any news on this? When are you expecting South Africa to be removed from this grey listing?
We have got 6 outstanding actions to submit, which we'll do so by February, and hoping that by June we will be off the grey listing. That's what we are working to achieve at the moment.
Yeah, indeed. I said it was my last question, but this is the last one now. When we look at the situation that are facing municipalities, and this is, I think, a very important one because this affects people directly. As things stand, 50 of the 257 municipalities in the country have active financial recovery plans. This must be a big worry for you, the municipalities around South Africa.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big worry. Once you are asked to provide a recovery plan, it presupposes that the funds have not been managed effectively in the past. If you've got municipalities of that size and number being on the recovery plan, it's a red flag. Yes, it's a worrying situation, and we want to attend to it. Minister SABC is developing a document which is going to submit to Cabinet, of course, working with us to say how do we deal with that matter.
All right, Minister, we leave it there. I've got to let you go. Thank you. Thanks for your time. Very busy morning, no doubt. That was the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana talking to us about some of the key issues that were unveiled in the medium-term budget policy statement that was announced yesterday.